I'm Natasha.
I'm Keith.
I'm Dave Spencer.
I'm Chris.
And this is the Automation Village.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Automation Village. My name's Chris.
And I'm Dave, and the rumors of my disappearance have only been partially exaggerated.
Yeah, it looks like I found you in the middle of this penitentiary in Halifax.
That's right. So we did meet up today in a fortress in Halifax. Luckily, I can leave this fortress at any time. At least I think so. I haven't tried yet.
That's true. We'll have to ask on the way out. And so we're coming to you live here. You may be already familiar with the Halifax Citadel, which is basically a British fortress in the top of a hill in the middle of downtown Halifax, from an earlier episode of the Automation Village where we talked about the signal masts, which you can't see but are right above our heads, which were actually kind of an Elizabethan form of encrypted distributed communication.
Yeah, that's right. And we're back today because we're actually putting together another piece which will be featured in this episode. And Chris, did you want to give a quick intro to that?
Well, if you ever grew up in Halifax or knew someone who grew up in Halifax, we can't shut up about tunnels in downtown Halifax. It's everyone's got a little bit of different information. So today we're actually going to do a piece about tunnels again. I think this would be Edwardian Halifax, and about how they are also a metaphor for some contemporary IT and process control objects.
Right. Well, that's very cool. I'm looking forward to it. I wasn't sure if the tunnels were even a rumor, so Chris promises me that he will film in a tunnel for you.
The answer is yes, they are, and no, they aren't. Tune in. So on that note, let's throw to Keith Donaldson, who's in our Aberdeen office, to bring you the industry news.
Sounds good, and we'll be back here a little later.
Today, the automation news is coming direct from rural Aberdeenshire. And we're going to start off with our usual take by considering something in space. This week, we're looking at SpaceX and their Starlink system. Now, since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the internet has been disconnected since the 2nd of March. Now, here in rural Aberdeenshire, I get my broadband through a microwave link from an antenna mounted on the side of my garage. This gives me a 60 meg symmetrical microwave connection. But in the Ukraine, Elon Musk shipped over a series of Starlink base units to provide them with internet connectivity. Now, the units have had great success. They are showing something like 200 megabyte downloads and something close to 17 megabyte uploads speeds, and they've got 100% coverage. Not only that, but they've actually modified the firmware of the Starlink units so that they've enabled roaming. The devices can then be used on the move. To date, these units have been fixed in place. Also, they modified the power factor used. Now, that does have a performance hit, but it reduces the heat signature of the devices so that they can't be tracked. And it also allows them to be used from the 12-volt cigarette lighter in a vehicle. So importantly, that allows them to have data connectivity on the move as they go. So fantastic work there from Elon Musk. Another consequence of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has been the effect on oil and gas prices here in the UK, Europe, and the rest of the world. Now, one of the things that we have here for our heating is based on a fuel oil-fired central heating system and a burner. And the fuel's kept in tanks like these. However, there have been a spate of thefts both locally and nationally since the price has more than doubled the cost to fill one of these tanks. And here technology again is coming into play with the use of IoT monitoring. So you'll see on the top of my tank there a little device which connects to the internet via, in this case, 3G or 4G SIM connection. But there are devices that use both mesh radio networks as well as local Wi-Fi to connect on to the cloud servers and report back the level of oil that's held in the tank. Now, this can be either by ultrasonic or by a float level switch. and just simply reports the contents of oil. Now, in an IoT system like that, you can set up a rate of change alarm so that you can monitor when the oil level changes rapidly, and that would either indicate a leak or a burst tank, or indeed the theft of a fuel. And these alerts can be sent to your mobile phone for tracking. So once again, technology playing a big part in our everyday lives. And finally this month on the Automation News, I came across a great article about the Green Eye system, which dynamically controls the amount of pesticides that are delivered when ploughing and dealing with the fields. Now, this system blends machine learning and artificial intelligence to determine the difference between crops and weeds, meaning that on the fly, the amount of pesticide deployed can be adjusted. Now, this is surely good news for the environment and also good news for the farmers, reducing the amount of pesticides used, the cost of producing the foods, making the farming more sustainable. Well, that's it for this month for the Automation News. I look forward to catching up with those folks going to VTScada Fest next week, and we will see you next month.
Each month on the Automation Village, we like to have a contest, and this month is no different. You get the chance to win one of two $100 online shopping vouchers, and all you have to do is send us an email. Later in this episode, we'll put up a slide that looks just like this. It will have a code phrase on it. So send that code phrase in the subject line to natasha.lutz@trihedral.com. If you'd like to see the full rules, then please go down in the video description and look for the link there. Good luck.
So if you grew up in Halifax like I did, you would have heard a lot of stories about the tunnels that run from here, Trihedral Hill, all the way under the downtown of the city to the waterfront, or in some cases to George's Island, which was a fortified installation on an island that you can, I think, see right there. So the purpose of these tunnels is open for debate. How many there were is open for debate. So today, let's take a moment and talk about, try to separate some of the fact from some of the fiction, and then let's use the metaphor of a military tunnel as a metaphor for something that we might use every day, especially these days, specifically a virtual private network, otherwise known as a VPN. Halifax, or Kjipuktuk, is located within Mi'kma'ki, the traditional ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq people. Today, it's a bustling city of about 450,000. Its deep harbor has always made it an important center for the military and for shipping and for government. When the British established an outpost here in 1749, they immediately set about building a series of fortifications. And from this base, they fought a series of wars with the French and also with the local Mi'kmaq population whose land this was. As threats from the French and later the 13 colonies grew, the British built larger and more sophisticated fortresses on this hill. Now, the star-shaped structure we have today was completed in 1856 after 28 years of construction. The harbor itself was protected by a series of distributed fortifications that included George's Island, Fort McNab, the Prince of Wales Martello Tower, York Redoubt, and a repeater at Campertown. Now, it's not so surprising to think that an old harbor town like Halifax, in fact, had a lot of different kinds of tunnels. In fact, many of the businesses downtown would have had their own short length of tunnel that they would have used to bring in goods while not interrupting street traffic. Also, Barrington itself, one of the major arteries along here, had its own coal tunnel, which I only found out very recently. There were also larger systems of tunnels that sort of connected a variety of different buildings in the downtown. But today, what I want to talk about is something a little bit different. So this is a sallyport. This is just one of the many smaller tunnels that actually make up the fortress of Citadel. What this one does is it allows people to get access from the interior of the fortress to the dry ditch, which again is not a moat, was never full of water. But we're here today because this tunnel is actually quite similar to the ones that we're talking about underneath Halifax. Of course, it's a bit bigger, the ceiling's a lot higher, but the overall construction is about the same. We have well-made walls made of masonry, We've got an angled arched roof, and they actually had alcoves at various intervals, which could be used for supplies for people who were the runners going back and forth. Now, what sets the tunnels we're talking about today apart from the others is that, unlike the others, which had branch points, which would connect to buildings downtown, the tunnels we're talking about were actually A to B. They were closed systems and didn't actually branch off to anywhere else. They literally connected the base of Citadel Hill to the waterfront. So over the last 100 years, there have been a number of notable discoveries of various parts of tunnels in downtown Halifax. There have been several discoveries along Duke Street, several along George, and in this case, on Prince Street. This one was discovered in 1976 by a Nova Scotia Power road crew who were putting in a utility pole. About 1.5 meters down, it opened up into this, again, a beautifully well-built tunnel with stone mason walls, an arched roof, and tellingly a wooden floor, which again leads credence to the theory that these were for runners and were definitely not sewers of any kind. So they contacted the Halifax Herald, and right away they sent journalist Barbara Hines. She brought photographer Lee Wombolt, and they captured this extraordinary picture down inside the tunnel, which they explored several blocks up towards Citadel Hill and a few blocks down towards the harbor. Well, John Cameron's family certainly thought so. However, at this time, there was construction on George's Island around the fortifications there that actually constructed quite a system of tunnels underneath the fortress on the island. So it's possible that John Cameron's family simply heard tunnels and George's Island and put the two together, and that became part of the folklore. What you can see behind me, I'm on the little drawbridge before the main gate of the fortress, is the dry ditch. And you might think when you come here that it's a moat, but in fact it wasn't designed to hold water. It was designed as a place where an attacker would have to crawl down into and then somehow scramble out of without getting shot from all of the portholes on either side. So if the tunnels did reach this far up the hill, they would have either connected to the far side here, which is very unrestored, or they would have had to gone under, or maybe they would have been simply removed during one of the many significant restorations that this fortress has undergone. So it's very possible that these tunnels simply terminated at the base of the hill down here on Brunswick Street. All of this brings us to the issue of security, because if in fact all we have is a giant tunnel that's open at both ends between point A and point B, then there would be no security whatsoever. Just because some person came running out of it, we didn't necessarily have any reason to believe anything that they said or anything that they brought. Now, if that sounds familiar, then ding, 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 we've come to the metaphor part of our program, and let's talk about virtual private networks. Now, of course, these are a form of end-to-end communication where one network can basically tunnel into another. There is not actually inherently security built into that process. That's something you have to configure yourself in order to make that secure. Let's ask our friend and IT security specialist Ian Smertzler from Dispel how he would add security to our Stone VPN.
The 19th century equivalent to a VPN would have been to have a person take a message, run out a side gate of Citadel Hill, ride through the town, get in a boat, and paddle out to George's Island. If you were dealing with petty criminals or a gang, yes, they might intercept a messenger or two, but most of the messages would get through. If the fortifications were doing their intended job, meaning they were defending against a sophisticated attacker, well, this just wasn't going to work, because a sophisticated attacker would not only see that there was a side entrance on both of these fortifications, but further be able to intercept most, if not all, of the messengers, meaning, yes, they would be holding a pile of gibberish if the messages were encrypted, but George's Island wouldn't be getting anything to read. The tunnels running underneath Halifax fall into two distinct categories. One are the tunnels that run between lots of different buildings and used to be used by lots of different people, rightfully so. The other were tunnels that ran straight from Citadel Hill, or straight from one building over to another building. We're going to start with the ones that were shared first. So these shared tunnels have an equivalent known as a shared or leased circuit. These are cables that are strung between a couple of valuable clients of a telecommunications company, and each of those clients leases a certain amount of space on that circuit. When you're dealing with a sophisticated attacker, either back in the 19th century or now, for all practical purposes, those circuits and or shared tunnels are as secure as the weakest lock on any one of those buildings. Because the moment you bust in, you're going to start being able to send messages to everybody. On a dedicated circuit, however, this would be the equivalent of having a fiber optic cable strung between two buildings. Now that's a different story, because that tunnel in the 19th century could be clearly guarded by your own people at both points. And the same is basically done now. The thing that they had in the 19th century, which we don't today, is the messenger himself who was traveling through that dedicated tunnel. And for want of a moniker, let's call him Smithers. Smithers was drinking buddies with the people at both ends of that tunnel. And further, because there was only a garrison of about 700 people inside of the citadel at any given point in time, Smithers probably knew most of the officers, if not all of them, which meant if Smithers was carrying a message, it was almost certainly a message sent by the person that Smithers had thought he was speaking to the intended recipient. So it was a true message. Yes, the contents might have been inaccurate, but they were written with the best of intentions, even though they were inaccurate. How do you deal with that now? Because you don't know who the messenger is necessarily. The messenger doesn't really exist. The way people solve that today is through the encryption that's placed on the message itself. You use the encryption as a means of evidencing truth of message. So what you typically have happen is the message, by being encrypted and decryptable at the entrance to the fortification, well, that's a good sign that whoever sent it had the same cipher. Great. But what about if someone's stolen that cipher, or they just happen to be in that building and they're passing messages to the person who's encrypting them? Well, to solve for that problem, what you then do is you put ciphers at each individual in both of these fortifications. And if you do that, that means that, yes, the message arrives at the fortification, it's decrypted there. Okay, that's a good sign that the outer payload at least is evidencing that whoever sent this message was over at the other fortress. But then it gets down to the other person, still in an encrypted state, partially, and that person decrypts the inner message. And by being able to decrypt the message, what that means is either the person who sent it has stolen all of your ciphers, or the person who sent it is the person that says they sent it. This structure, allowing for some abstraction, is what zero trust is. And it's something that many firms are implementing right now because they have realized that people have found ways to punch in behind the primary gate in their proverbial fortifications. Now, as to the tunnel that purportedly ran out to George's Island, when the rumor of that tunnel came out, Citadel Hill was beginning to become obsolete. It had completed its renovation in 1856. The rumor appeared at the end of 1860. Citadel Hill and the other fortifications around Halifax are a monument to mid-19th century great power competition. And one thing that you get with fortifications is they're extremely expensive to upgrade. What isn't expensive is a rumor. And if you were a sophisticated attacker planning an attack against a fortification, one of the things you would certainly expend resources trying to find out in advance of an attack was how people could communicate with each one of these fortresses and move people around. Now, these purported channels of communication, ones that would cause people to spend more money on reconnaissance, have their equivalents all over the place in the digital world. You'll often hear them referred to as moving target defense networks or low attribution networks, but these are networks that might exist at any given point in time or might not, because they don't always have to exist in the digital world, running between 2 points.
So there we have it. I've had my chance to tell even more people about the tunnels of Halifax, and we've all had a chance to think about how we actually secure our networks. VPNs are a big part of all of our lives right now, and it's important that we know in principle how they work and some of the best practices. So I encourage you to, right now, go to Wikipedia, read an article, or better yet, go to Dispel and read some of the literature they have there about how to keep your network safe.
Okay, Hey, welcome everybody to this month's edition of the Data Wave. Last month, we looked at the topics of redundancy and resiliency, and we want to carry that forward today with our wonderful panel. For those who may be new to the Automation Village, I want to introduce Ian Mertzler. Ian is the president of Dispel out of Texas, coming from the private side of the industry. Lee Kibler is from Riviera Utilities down in Alabama, and been an end user forever of products, runs a large wastewater plant. My name is Pam Moss, and I work for Hawk and Aquatic Informatics. We are the manufacturers of chlorine analyzers, softwares, et cetera, laboratory equipment. And today, Pete Diffley is not going to be able to be with us today, but he works with VTScada. He's down getting ready for their VTScada Fest. So he is not going to be with us today. So Lee and Ian and I are going to try to move forward in honor of Pete. And I'm sure we'll do a fine job looking at our roundtable today. But just to get started one moment, I was teaching in some water distribution classes this week and information management classes that our automation committee here in North Carolina puts together. And it's really interesting sometimes to take a step back and look at all levels from, small utilities to large utilities and walk that path of paper maps, versus things being on your iPad or tablet, looking at information systems, but those people who sought to do it all by hand. And to me, this really feeds into our discussions of redundancy and reliability, how we run our businesses, whether you're water, wastewater, power, transportation, whatever you may be. But it's interesting sometimes, you guys, to take that step back, see how far we've come, but see how far we still need to go. But that was part of my, last week we were discussing some really interesting thoughts came in my head in that same stead of where we've been, where we're going. So I want to talk with Lee and Ian a little bit here about your thoughts from last month as we move into a further discussion of this redundancy resiliency topic. So I'm going to go to Lee first to give us your thoughts.
Wow. I tell you what, man, as my beard grows in and the gray starts showing, we've had, since the last time we've met, we've had to touch base with our chief operator for our wastewater plant retiring and a brand new chief operator taking the reins, and all of the learning lessons that go along with a transition of leadership from one person to the next, and all of the bumps and bruises along the way. I'm going to take a day off this week because it's just been a really interesting time. But that gives us a key to our resiliency as an organization, that we lose that tie to the past. We don't have the strong lessons learned and a documentation of that lessons learned going through ages. And we learn this, we tend to have the same bumps on our forehead from the same lessons that we learned 10, 15, 20 years ago. Because just because you have a new plant doesn't mean it's not going to be susceptible to the sins of the past. So anyway, what the call for us to do now is, as we go through this growth, is to, for instance, if you have a prime example, the old operator, we went through an episode where we had a conductivity probe, or pH probe with an ORP sensor on it that has to be manifested in the holder in a wastewater stream. That if it's turned and rotated in the holder, you don't get an accurate ORP signal. So that was just, we just did that by word of mouth, and I'm at fault because I did it. I found the problem before. I showed the previous operator how to handle that by rotating the contact to where the cleaning station would see it, and it would actually see the wastewater and wouldn't get toilet paper on it or any other debris in the holder. So we went through that with the new operator, but this time we're going to do things a little different. We're going to do a one-page operating instruction to make that process resilient. We'll post that within the analyzer so that when the operator opens the analyzer, there it is.
Information is power, isn't it, Lee? Information is power.
It's the small things that we do in our jobs that we take for granted that cause the most grief. Another episode we had this previous week is we had some return feeds coming from a dewatering process that was really high ammonia, and we ran too much. And the plant is only designed for it's only designed for so much ammonia coming in for the irrigation system without making some major changes to the process. So we had to learn that lesson. We learned a lesson about grease, and if we put too much grease in the front of the plant. So we have these lessons that we learn. And as we document these things going forward, I'm 55 years old. And so retirement is within my horizon. And, I could become ill. I could have a car accident. And we just need to be able to take this information and pass it forward. So the other huge thing that we've been dealing with as far as resiliency has been long lead times on spare parts, not having adequate spare parts, using the same paradigm from the past where you could say, well, I'll just call up Automation Direct and order it, and it will be coming in from Atlanta overnight. And that just doesn't exist anymore, my friends. And I'm sure Ian and I'm sure Pam both have been seeing this. The expectations of the people within our organization have not changed. They still expect it overnight. That is not a rational expectation while the world is being torn apart by its roots. And Ian, I would love to hear your take on the supply chain things, and if you're seeing an impact of how the ties to the past, and every time you get a retirement as a supplier, what does that do to your organization?
So we'll start with the biggest one, which is supply chain and the link to knowledge supply chains. So everyone struggles with knowledge management. We're a relatively young company. It's 7 years old now. And even there, you have a long enough period of time that not only are there people who shift out and then you need to bring new people in, but also people just forget what the heck they did 3 years ago. And I've seen this happen at other companies as well, which are spending far more money than we are on trying to solve this knowledge management problem. And the short answer is the more you push into a standardized format of knowledge exchange, the more effective you're going to be at keeping everyone up to date on what the heck is going on. Simple, practical things like at least having 1 day a week where you have everyone in the office and cookies on a table, therefore people talk to one another, is one of the easiest ways to ensure that people have some recollection of every incident within an organization. From a cybersecurity point of view, it's fair to say that the time that since we last all met, the world got a little bit different. And in critical infrastructure in particular, it became a matter no longer of saying, yeah, I might follow these standards to, oh, my contract says I was supposed to be following those standards. And in critical infrastructure in particular, this is quite a major problem because most critical infrastructure institutions operate on cycles of 3 to 6 months on decision making. So what makes an organization resilient? An organization is resilient if it is able to react in time when it absolutely has to. So I've seen the most bizarre shifts, divergences, where cities that have had reputations of being exceptional at being at the leaders of new innovation, having people retire / quietly leave because of simply not having followed the rules for so long. Whereas I've been in areas where population 7,000, these people, I was pointing out to, I was doing a drive around Mississippi, and I noted that there have been over 20 different new standards in cybersecurity that had come out over the past 2 years. And one person said, yep, I've read them. And he wasn't kidding. And that knowledge, that is another case of knowledge catch-up in the oddest areas. So what has happened from a cybersecurity point of view? Fortunately, our government has written very clear, very easy to follow, and not very costly instructions on how to harden our systems quickly. It is essential that, at least in critical infrastructure, this move to the front of the queue. And it's not something that makes anyone any particularly large amounts of money. Most cybersecurity companies will do anything to avoid working in critical infrastructure, but it's got to get done. And
do you see more of a push because of the war in Ukraine?
The danger is very real.
Do you see more push for folks?
I think, well, the concern is that the more you ratchet down these economic sanctions, the higher the probability is that someone is going to lash out. And the easiest way to lash out is through cyber attacks, because, and our critical infrastructure is woefully underprotected because it is a fragmented system, which normally makes it very efficient. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it meant that most places did not build systems that are very up to date. To put it in context, I would say that most water utilities I go to have security systems that are non-existent. You can route into them if you're in town. So that's not a good thing.
It's not. And we wanted to bring that up today because so much has changed these past 2 weeks. And when you get a large event like the war in Ukraine happening and more cyber attacks, you've got to be ready. Like you said, you've got to be nimble. You can't be that same, okay, here's my box. I'm going to stay in this box. Then after I get done with this box, I move to the second box, the third box. I think that really the message I'm seeing out here is how those plans make sure everyone, whether they're 20 something or 80 something, they know what's going on. Knowledge is power, but be nimble because you're going to have to react to some things we haven't dealt with before. We're good at hurricanes. We're good at ice storms. We're good at tornadoes. We know what to do when things get broken. Cyber is a whole nother world that you may not understand the impacts around that. I'm sure, Lee, you're dealing with that at Riviera, is how do you teach the 20-somethings or 30-somethings that idea of how to react, but also those of us who have more season to us, how can we be more nimble and change with that? It sounds like what you're dealing with that now, Lee, as you have folks retiring. How do you train the young folks?
It's frightening to me because, we're in an age where everybody wants to put TikTok on their phone and, social media. That's a harbinger for any type of malware. There are links everywhere to click on. Man, I tell you what, we're passing out smartphones like crazy in our organization because we just started a brand new program that does mobile work. So we have we have to use a smartphone, which you use a VPN to connect to the work servers, but that's not the problem. The problem is when it's not connected to the VPN and you pick up the malware and it's on the phone and then you connect the VPN and guess what? There you go. Yeah. People, it's just a lack of awareness that your actions are not just when you're connected doing work business. You can be at home and infect your, you have a small SD card that you use to, transfer pictures from your home computer and you bring it to work and you plug it in your secure network and guess what? Wham! You've compromised your SCADA system. Guys, this is a difficult problem. All we can do is continue with training, but the system itself has got to be resilient because we're just human beings and we're going to make mistakes. It's what we do when we do make the mistake and how the resources like Ian, people that you have on your team to be able to respond to the eventuality. What happens when I do this? What happens when ransom attack occurs? How do we respond to these ransom attacks or malware?
Infrastructure side, it's both, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about last time doing situational drills and we were ready for the hurricane. We did really well during the hurricane. We had to operate systems by hand. But like I said, several team members have retired. So now we have to bring a whole new crew of people in, and we have to take the knowledge from our senior operators and transfer it to the younger operators, not only for, virtual systems, but also physical systems.
Oh, that's great. Ian, do you have any last words before we sign off here from the Data Wave?
From a resilience point of view, the most important thing anyone can do right now, if they're worried about cybersecurity, is they need to go online and read the template for NIST 800-171. The government will help you secure your own systems. Just you do it today. Pam, I have one question for you, and you as moderator find yourself in the odd position of being unable to give advice unless someone else asks it. You sit in a role where you've probably talked to 20 times as many people as I have over the course of my career in data. So how in the world do you educate a broad spectrum of people? If you work at a plant and you're like Lee and you know there's a problem, what is the best approach that you would suggest to getting data getting broad insight out to people on what to do and what not to do when it comes to making your data systems resilient?
To me, it's as Leah said earlier, I think it starts with the human being and understanding the human, how humans react. Not everybody reacts the same way nor learns the same way. Mm-hmm. Some people are very good at change, other people are not. But I think as a supervisor or a consultant, knowing the personalities within that group and empowering them to be part of the solution and come up with those procedures to help them. Most people, you can't give something, say, just go do it, without explaining what it is.
Yeah.
Right. You can't have that little come to Jesus there. You've got to be able to bring them in, empower them, and put them part of the process. If they have the buy-in and the understanding and the education, then most people are going to do it the right way. And if something happens, it's how you as a supervisor or a consultant handle that person who just made an honest mistake. But that's what I see. That to me, that's coming from the lab too. If someone doesn't run a method right, how do I approach that? And teach. So get in teaching mode, learning how that person learns, I think is most important. And I think you apply that here to cybersecurity, taking care of that human side. You can hard out that hard side, but it's the humans that can be your weakest link, as we've said earlier. But to me, it's teach. Teach a man to fish. That type of thing, getting that information. But a really great question though, Ian. And a great way to wrap up the Data Wave for today. So you guys, thank you very much, Lee and Ian. Always a pleasure. Pete, sorry you're not with us today. We'll see you next month. And thank you guys very much. See you in April.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Stark, and today we've got Todd Barnett from Cross joining us. Todd, how you doing today?
Great. Glad to be here.
So tell us about Cross and what kind of work you do there.
Cross Company, we're out of Greensboro, North Carolina. We consist of 5 internal branches: automation, hose and fittings, mobile systems integration, precision measurement, calibrations. My group's the Process Solution Group. We specifically concentrate on industrial programming, commissioning, valve automation, troubleshooting, repair, upgrade, the derived control module to give your interactions between physical and modules. So you want to create a good functional design before you go in and start creating an application system with batch. But it's just how everything reacts from the start to the end product.
So along those lines, would there be some sort of diagram or drawings or things like that that would be useful?
Yes, we have a white paper that we developed that we use with customers to understand the batching system. I can share with you. And the batching in this model defines a set of tasks, a recipe per se, and actions to carry out the strategy for making the product. It creates an ordered sequence of operations, preventing less errors and a better batch tracking for the customer.
What's the relationship between batching and SCADA?
Batching is a set of model design tasks or recipe. The actions can carry out a strategy for making a product. This creates an ordered sequence of operations, preventing less errors and better batch tracking.
So in what ways is it used differently in different industries?
Well, using batch is designed as flexible to be used in many ways. Keeping with the ISA 88 structure, you're able to modify, adjust, or do what you need to do in the structure to keep it running.
So in your experience, what's the key to a successful batching system?
In the short term, a functional design specification is really critical to providing success in, your programming and creating that model to begin with.
Long term, kind of the same thing, more efficiency and things like that? Or?
Yeah, if you determine all the things that happen up front, it increases product efficiency, cycle time, the quality, traceability, and management systems. So in the long term, that really helps with that.
Where do these systems get into trouble? When do you start to actually have some problems?
If you don't take into account the ISA 88 standard and you do not design this to be flexible for changes, and you don't take into account exception handling when the process stops or heat changes, if you don't take in that account, you will have problems down the road.
And obviously Cross always uses that. So that is a differentiators too. Maybe.
We train and we work to keep everything in a, standards. Everything we do is by standards, and by batch, we use ISA 88 as a standard.
So when you have issues, how can those issues be avoided? How can you solve some of the problems that you may get into?
Well, that's again where the functional design specification comes into play. As we're going over it with the customer, we're discussing all the process interlocks, the operating system, the operating units, procedural conditions. So we try to outline all that up front. So when we get to the programming phase, we've taken to task everything that needs to happen to make a successful product.
So as an integrator of these kind of systems, what's your greatest challenge when you're doing those types of batching systems?
Honestly, it's probably selling the functional design specification, because we're coming in, we're not doing work, we're just going over the document, trying to create a document to do that. So we have to have a buy-in for the customer, why it's important, why it will save you time down the road, why it will prevent things from happening during startup. And that's probably the hardest thing, is the buy-in to create that document.
So Todd, what are some of the questions people should ask when they're choosing a new or replacement batching system?
One of the biggest questions I think they should go into is how well is my product tracked? Is the information that I'm storing, is it easily attained? How often and long is my data stored? Is my current system redundant? Is it upgradable to a new computer platform, with lifespans and Windows applications? How easy is it to restore my platform if I have a catastrophic failure? The 5 considerations that we really go into for a batching system are: what is in my ingredients, where they've received and how they're transferred, which feed method is best. Not all meat feed methods are free flowing. Which method is best, loss in weight, gain in weight. Will I measure the automated system's accuracy? And what additional features do I expect from an automated batching system? Those are the questions they really need to ask themselves before they move forward.
What system information do people need before they contact a company like yours?
Mainly the last 5 things I just spoke about. They really need to go through that and consider that in their system and how it applies to them and what they need. We've worked with many platforms, that we've implemented this with. So it's not a question of necessarily their process controllers or anything else. It's just why you're going to use batching, what's the benefit to you, and what are you looking to get out of it. So
how can people reach you?
My contact is todd.barnett, it's BARNETTE @crossco.com, or I can be reached at 865-342-7236. Our webpage is crossco.com.
Well, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for joining us, Todd. That was really, really good. We'll catch you real soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome welcome to Questions with Nat. So I'm coming to you today from my backyard, and as you can tell, I live in a colder climate. There's still snow in the ground, snow in the air. So if you're like me and you want to get out of the cold and the snow, come join us next week in sunny Florida for VTScada Fest. There are still tickets available, but I'm going to get right into the questions, and Chris, I'm going to throw this first one to you, and it is, I'm running VTScada version 10. How difficult is it for me to get onto the newest version?
Thanks, Natasha. So the answer is it's either really simple or it's really, really simple. So the really, really simple version is if you're running version 10 or above, we're on version 12 right now, then all you need to do is run the installer over top of the one you have right now. It's one of the few cases where you will have to actually shut down VTScada for a few minutes while you run the installer. The nice part is if you've got a distributed application, you can do this server by server. So the rest of your system is seamlessly carrying on with monitoring and control. And if you've got a version older than version 10, there's a few more steps to go through, but there's a very simple guide you can download or you can find in the VTScada help on board that will tell you about all the little things you need to look out for if you're upgrading from this version to that version or this version to that version. But basically, the thing to take away is that we make it super easy to upgrade basically any. We've had super old versions of VTScada that we've been able to bring forward to the latest version in just a few clicks.
And Dave, I'm going to send this question to you. When choosing communication protocols, what's the difference between Modbus and DNP3?
Great question, Natasha. So one of the big differences with DNP3 and Modbus really comes down to the end purpose. So we see DNP3 really is built for systems with telemetry, where Modbus works a lot better for systems that are inside of a local LAN. Now, it's not to say people don't use each in other cases, but this is really where we see them most often. And the reason for that is DNP3 supports a lot of more advanced features, and those features really become a benefit when the network is limited by bandwidth. So if you've got a very high-speed network and you can pull all your I/O constantly every second, then Modbus is great. It's very simple, it's very common, and it's great for that. But DNP3 has priority on messages, supports more of a report by exception, and also is able to package some history if sites disconnect for some time. Realistically, if you are looking at a distributed network, a radio network, then DNP3 is a really nice protocol to take a look at, where Modbus is simple, it's busy, it's common, and it's great inside your LAN.
All right, everyone, it's now time for the secret code phrase. Get your email open, have an email ready to go to me, natasha.lutz@trihedral.com, and in the subject field, you're going to put Tunnels of Halifax. So the first one who the email is received by me is going to win $100. Good luck.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. We want to thank everybody for joining us today.
Todd Barnett with Cross, Pam Moss with Hawk, Lee Kibler with Riviera Utilities, and Ian Schmertzler with Dispel.
That's right. And if you've enjoyed today's show, then please be sure to click that like, subscribe, and the little bell so you get a notification. We do put out one of these pretty much every month.
That's right. And if you are looking for an industrial award-winning SCADA software, well, this show is brought to you by VTScada. And actually, we have a free version of our award-winning product. It's called VTScada Lite. You can download it from our website. It's not a trial. It doesn't just last for a little bit. It's an indefinite industrial license that you can use forever for up to 50 I/O. So go get it.
And so before we take off, a big shout out to everybody who's either furiously getting ready for VTScada Fest or perhaps is there now actually starting on VTScada Fest.
That's right. And for everyone else, we will see you in April.
Bye-bye.
wanna go.